You sit down, ready to play, no, ready to practice. You've been on a mission for weeks now, determined to climb to the next rank, and the only thing that's in your way is a bit of personal improvement. You start by playing match after match, having good games and bad, but knowing all the while that it's all part of the process. And then, out of a desire for a break, you head over to Twitch where your favorite pro player is live. You watch him closely and notice the very different strategies and playstyles that he uses. It's entertaining and a little inspiring. And it's not long before you're motivated to hop back into the game yourself. And this motivation then carries you on and brings you through a few more hours of gaming before things start to slip. You lose one match, then the next, and now you're feeling frustrated, wondering, what the hell am I doing wrong? But you console this frustration by watching gameplay from high-level players and even skimming through some tips and tricks videos. You eventually hop back into the game yourself, grind out a few more hours, and then finally log off. And at the end of it all, you look back on the day and tell yourself that it was a full, well-rounded day of gaining new experiences and learning from the pros. But despite all this experience and all the lessons that you gathered throughout the day, you wake up the next day only to remember one or two small tips. It's as if your mind has been wiped clean and most of the experiences just never happened. But you don't think much of it, you enter the next day to do it all over again. And then the cycle continues for weeks while you seem to be stuck at the same skill level. And eventually, you feel less and less confident. You notice that your friends are getting better, but despite your effort, you feel like you're almost getting worse. And this is a perfect example of putting in a ton of effort to improve, yet retaining very little. And what's so scary about this scenario is that it often happens without us even noticing. We go through a day of intense gaming and gather tons of nuanced lessons and keys for improvements, yet we retain very little. But imagine if we could just absorb more information and learn and develop at a faster rate. Because if you could retain more information and learn at a faster rate, you develop a genius level of game sense and a pro level of understanding for the game. You would finally be able to outthink nearly any opponent and push through to that higher skill level. So the only question that exists is, how exactly do we make that happen? It's no secret that pro-level players have some sort of superhuman understanding of the game, and this is often referred to as instinct or game sense. And this is more or less just an abundance of game knowledge and lessons from past experiences, which are all wrapped into a bundle of information. And that bundle of information is then used to make complex decisions and mental calculations and execute highlight-worthy plays. Now, of course, when you backwards engineer this, you realize that developing a pro-level game sense is really just a matter of absorbing all that game knowledge and experience. And of course, in order to do that, all you really need to do is watch guides and tips and tricks videos, study gameplay from pro players, and then constantly grind out games to gain your own experience. But you likely know that already. So maybe you watch pro players, you study the latest strategies, and you put in the time needed to improve. But still, you might find yourself making careless mistakes that you know you've made before, or completely forgetting most of the game knowledge that you've learned in the past and retaining only small bits of information after watching hours of pro footage. And this leaves the question, why is it so difficult to retain this information, and is it possible to absorb knowledge easier so that we can improve faster? Well, to answer these questions, we need to first understand how you learn and how your memory works. Now, the memory is often thought of like a computer that takes in information and then stores it in your long-term memory, which is sort of like your database. But in order for you to gain new knowledge, your brain must go through the steps of absorbing and encoding sensory information, processing it in your working memory, and only then storing it in the long-term memory. In other words, in order to store that information in your mental database, it needs to be filtered and processed. Now, the key factor for this is your working memory. The working memory is what's responsible for processing new information, comparing it and mixing it with information that you already know, and then using this cocktail of information to make decisions, recognize patterns, and most importantly, store new information in your mental database. But here's the issue: your working memory is limited. On average, we can only hold 2 to 4 chunks of information in the working memory at a time. And those 2 to 4 chunks of information are only really held there for about 10 to 20 seconds unless we do something with it, like process it, write it down, or apply it to something. And these limitations create bottlenecks in the learning process. Because if we don't actively rehearse and process new information for an extended amount of time, that information will never get sent to your long-term memory. It'll just disappear. And of course, in our day-to-day lives and even in our gaming matches, we are bombarded with a downpour of information. And since the working memory can only hold a few slots of information, every time we switch our focus or need to take in new data, the short-term memory basically hits the reset button to make room, meaning that we're deleting the information before it's ever processed or absorbed. And this is why you feel so limited as a player. You might watch pro players in pro games and feel like you've learned something, but then fail to actually make any changes. You might be constantly grinding out games, but not learning any clear lessons. And perhaps you're watching YouTube guides, but then if asked to recite all the tips and tricks the next day, you'd probably draw a blank. And the reason this all happens is simply because your brain couldn't process the key information quickly or efficiently, and as a result, it was never absorbed. So your memory is very limited and flawed, but just because of that doesn't mean that it's not powerful. Because when your working memory is successful, it effectively organizes tons of information into complex patterns called schemas. And schemas allow us to learn faster. Because when you develop an understanding for something, your brain essentially creates a new network, a new web of information. And the more webs of information we have, the easier it becomes to connect a new network to ones that already exist. Thus, the more schemas we develop, the easier and faster it becomes to develop our game sense. So if we can effectively improve the working memory and our ability to get information into the long-term memory, we will improve our knowledge and skill at an increasing velocity. So how do we unlock our brain's ability to learn at such a fast rate? How do we nurture the information in our working memory so that it can be processed and encoded into the long-term memory? Well, while there are many advanced learning techniques that are out there, I've taken some of the easiest yet most powerful ones and created a 5-step process. The first step is to address the limitations of the working memory. Since the working memory is limited in capacity, we need to slow things down. The surplus of information that we need to process during any game is just too much. It makes it difficult to take away any clear lessons. And this is why professional players review their matches. When you are reviewing your match, you're able to slow down the game, highlight key plays, and actively gather key lessons at a pace which your brain can learn. Similarly, if you're trying to gain new information while watching a guide on YouTube or watching a pro stream, actively pause the video when you discover something important. Slow it down, give yourself time to ponder 1 or 2 pieces of information at a time. Because by giving yourself this extra time to stop and think, your brain won't actively delete the information like it would otherwise. You'll finally have the opportunity to store it in the long-term memory. But once you've slowed things down and cultivated a focus on 1 or 2 core ideas, you must actively process and record the information. Since the working memory only tends to store information for about 10 to 20 seconds, you must start by mentally rehearsing the information that you're trying to commit to memory. And the most effective way to do this is to start writing things down while you're learning them. Because when you actively write something down, you are forcing yourself to mentally rehearse it at a slower pace, stretching out the time that you're pondering the subject and making it more likely to stick in your long-term memory. So, as you watch a tips and tricks video or review a match or watch a pro player, take notes on each of the big lessons until you've collected a handful of important ideas. But as I mentioned earlier, the brain learns new things by creating mental webs of knowledge, where each piece of information is connected to other pieces. And the more connections that we make to an idea, the more that idea will stick. So take these core lessons or ideas that you wrote down, and then think about the details of what they really mean and how they really apply to what you already know. Consider how they add to your existing knowledge or how they completely change it. And then consider what context this information or these lessons will matter the most and why exactly they're so important to remember. And then of course, once you've given these ideas context and meaning, be sure to write that down with your notes. And then once you've done that, you've recorded the key lessons and their significance, it's time to commit them all to memory using a powerful technique called recall. And now recall is really just the process of looking away from the material and seeing what you can remember simply based on memory. Think of preparing for a test using cue cards. In one experiment, students who studied a text and then practiced it by recalling as much information they could and then repeated that process learned far more than their peers who either went on to something else or reread the text over and over again. In fact, the recall students learned about 80% of the key facts, while non-recall students only learned about 34%, meaning that by simply using the method of recall, the students were able to learn over twice as much information. So attempt to recall the information that you wrote down without looking at the material, and only look back at it when you can't recall it. Then repeat this process until you can mentally recite each core idea in their context just based off memory. And finally, it's time to apply these learned lessons. If it's a strategy that you just learned about, then hop into a game and practice it. If it's a key tip for improving your accuracy, then hop into a game and practice it. And if it's a breakthrough on a new mindset that you want to have during ranked games, then hop into a game and practice it. Because by immediately putting these lessons into action, you're not only remembering it easier, but you'll start to turn that knowledge into a subconscious habit or instinct. But of course, if that key lesson is something that requires a very specific situation to apply, then use visualization. For example, if you learn something new about map control against a very specific enemy in a very specific situation, then it may not be easy to replicate that right away. But you can still use visualization to trick your mind into thinking that you're in that situation. So picture yourself in that scenario where the key lesson comes into play. Then slow it down in your mind. See yourself making the decision and taking the necessary action. Feel what it's like to make that decision and see what the result would be. And so this is the process. Start by slowing things down and cultivating your focus, then writing down the key lessons that you want to remember, processing these lessons deeply, using recall to make sure the information sticks, and finally applying it so it becomes an instinct. And consider the implication of this process. By even just writing down key lessons that you want to remember, then looking away and using recall, you'll at least double your learning ability. But of course, implementing an aspect of taking notes and studying your material might seem a little weird when it comes to your gaming sessions. We usually just play one match after the next or watch one video and then move on right away. But by taking the time to review your matches, write down and ponder important ideas, and actively commit them to your long-term memory, you'll surpass the limitations of your mind and vastly improve the rate at which you develop as a player. So get yourself a notebook that you can dedicate to recording your gaming lessons and start implementing this process today. And of course, you don't need to aggressively take notes on everything and memorize every piece of information you can, but by actively learning a few major lessons every day, you'll be able to improve at a faster and faster rate, absorbing more and more game knowledge and developing the game sense and instincts of a pro player. Hey guys, I hope you loved this video and I hope you got a ton of value from it. And if you did, then make sure to leave a comment down below and let me know what your biggest takeaway is. And of course, this video is brought to you by our very own esports supplement, eAdvantage. Now, eAdvantage is designed to help you get better in-game results and help you to improve your skills faster, and it does this by giving you a focus and energy boost, one beyond any sort of typical energy drink, and of course it does so in a much healthier way. It essentially combines beneficial ingredients that you might find in an energy drink, but adds even better brain-boosting ingredients to it, and then packs it all into a small capsule. As a result, you get a huge focus boost and even a memory boost in a much healthier and even cheaper way. And there are tons of eAthlete Labs fans that have been using eAdvantage, and we've been getting amazing feedback from it. One fan even sent in an email mentioning that he was able to climb 3 ranks in 2 weeks, nearly double his accuracy, and start getting 29.63% more kills due to eAdvantage. So if you want to give it a try and see how much it helps you improve, then use the code eAthlete13 to get 13.5% off your entire order. The link for eAdvantage as well as this code will be in the description down below. But if supplements are not your thing and you still want to help support the channel, then grab yourself some eAthlete merch. You can now get a custom esports jersey, a mouse pad, or even a hoodie so you can start repping eAthlete. And every single merch sale really does help us out. It helps us allocate more time and resources to every single video. So not only will you look great with the merch, but it really does help us out. And the link for the merch store as well as a discount code will also be in the description down below. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.